In terms of AI, it is true that fine-tuning large language models is often one way to generate additional value. And especially for existing players who have access to existing data, it is one way to really make a product that is better.
Welcome to the Product People podcast, where we learn from amazing product leaders about product management, growth, and product ops. I'm today's host, Mira Lamus, founder and CPO at Product People. Today's guest is Florin Ciontu, Senior VP Product B2C at Stepstone, a leading job platform in Europe. Florin is passionate about customer centricity and the impact of generative AI. Welcome, Florin.
Thank you, Mirella, and good to be chatting today.
Same here. I'm excited to hear your opinion on AI, as we've had a previous conversation where you mentioned that this is a game changer. But first, I would like to start with your background and your current role at Stepstone to frame this for our audience.
So I come from an engineering background and somehow landed in product management. Now, I started at a time where product management probably didn't really exist as a discipline. And you had all groups of people working in technology, and then some of them were focusing more on the hustling. And then in time, I think that combined with a bit of project management, with an interest in users, became what we call today the product management discipline. So I've been then with Stepstone for about 8 years. I think this is my 5th job at Stepstone. Definitely an interesting journey in a growing company. And today, I run the B2C side of the marketplace experience in the EMEA division of our Stepstone.
Thank you, Florin. And what does your product portfolio consist of currently?
If you think about marketplaces, now that being job classifieds, but essentially any type of classifieds, they're typically two sides, consumer and businesses. So for us, that would be job seekers and recruiters, respectively. The job seeker experience is the core of my remit. And when we think about a job board, that typically includes the core experience of a job seeker as they start orienting themselves in a job search, understanding what options are in front of them, taking a look at a job vacancy, applying for a job. That's what we see traditionally as a remit. But recently that has started to expand into areas that are also relevant for job seekers, typically advice and guidance, either very early on before job seekers start their journey, or much deeper in the funnel after they have applied to a job. So that's the core of the remit. It's a good size organization, about 30 teams with about 100 people spanning over not only product management, but UX research, design, and data science and analytics.
Thanks for the overview, and I like the holistic way you're looking at it of solving the job for people seeking jobs, and at the same time that it starts at what should I look into to begin with.
Yeah.
And you see that this is already validated to some degree. There are a lot of coaching platforms, there are a lot of people who would like to be paid to pimp up your resume or give you any type of advice. And the market has really exploded in that area in the last years, at least judging by all the LinkedIn influencers. So it's really cool that you're incorporating this into your teams. And since you have 30 teams covering about 100 people, how do you oversee that? So from your perspective, what makes a strong product management organization to begin with?
Yeah, well, yes, it depends also whom you ask. But at the core, if you think about product in the context of a business, I'd say probably the first measure are the outcomes, right? So a strong product organization is one that manages to deliver outcomes predictably over the short term, but also with enough leading indicators for the medium and long term. Now, probably then the next layer of that answer is to say what drives success and what drives successful outcomes. And typically, I think it's a lot about capabilities and people. And if we think about the best predictor for success in 2-3 years for a product organization, I would say is, first of all, the skill base. And that's really already a fairly wide range. Data, for example, in our case, it is a core capability, it's a core skill that we want to have across the team, but not only. The user obsession is equally necessary. So the extent to which an organization has those type of skills embedded, and then on top of that, the best practices associated with product craft are, in my view, the core drivers for outcomes.
I like that you are also describing what's not, and I agree with the best practices, and that looking at the outcomes and looking at the skills people need to have, it's a great way to go forward. And yeah, you mentioned the customer obsession as being very important at Stepstone. So how do you guide product teams in discovering customer needs and push innovation forward?
In our cases, it's essential to keep in mind that this is an organization that manages an existing portfolio, which is it's an existing business with assets that have been developed over plus 20 years. So it's a necessary combination between optimizing the existing assets and trying to understand how we could ideally disrupt the status quo. And those two areas require slightly different approaches. If we are talking about optimizing existing assets, this is more or less an inside-out approach where we can rely on a lot of data, first of all. That's usually the starting point. We have a wealth of existing research, and most of the time, it involves understanding how people react to our existing products. If we then think about transformation or approaching new areas, we have to take a slightly different approach. It is often purely outside in. And here we have made the choice of relying on jobs to be done as a framework. And I would say more than a framework, we've made the choice to develop it into the common language that the entire product organization is using to think about opportunities. We've made a significant investment in this area over the past year, and that's continuing to make sure that this is a tool that's adopted. We have already built a certain knowledge base, and it is continuing, and I would expect it to continue over the next few years.
Amazing. Could you give me an example on how it's happening now after we've introduced the jobs to be done framework compared to how you used to do this before?
So I guess one good example is the area you mentioned before. The job seeker experience is actually being transformed, among others, because of the rise of AI as a disruptive technology. So this is for us an opportunity to ask the question, how would we fundamentally redesign our services? And to be able to answer that question effectively, you need a framework that allows you to go to the fundamental question of what does a job seeker need, irrespective of an existing user journey, irrespective of any solution. And this is where we find that jobs to be done as a framework is very strong when going back to the basics.
I'm also a big fan and have consistently used this, especially in B2B. But of course, it's also quite helpful for B2C because you can frame even large companies or apps as a job to be done statement. So if you think of looking for fashion inspiration or just solving boredom, you think of Instagram and Pinterest. Or if you move to a new country tomorrow and you need to furnish your flat completely from one day to the other, you think of IKEA that has positioned itself to solve that job from small to large furniture to cutlery and anything else you need in your house to be ready to go the next day. I really love this approach. And you've also mentioned AI. And we all know a lot has changed in November 2022 when ChatGPT became publicly available. So how has AI impacted your product strategy since? And what role does it play in your current product development?
I think it's fair to say that we can talk about before November 22 and after. And when we look at our capabilities and when we actually talk about AI-enabled capabilities, that's a different way of saying there are things we can do now that we wouldn't have dreamt of before November 2022. So at Stepstone, we have made the choice to become an AI-first company. That is a fundamental decision with strategic implications. Part of that, the ability to fully leverage AI whenever possible in product development. And today, that is core. The starting point, it is already a job seeker need. and the intersection between a job seeker need and business value. But we have made a choice to develop a systematic understanding of the new capabilities that are unlocked at AI and try to use them when developing solutions.
And when you've decided to be an AI first company, solving the job seekers' needs while also creating business value, has this changed your current development process? Aside from introducing jobs to be done for discovery and making sure the whole product organization uses it and it knows about it.
In a certain way, many things have stayed the same. The focus on user centricity is there as a generic trait of product development. There are, however, some specificities. What we're discovering as we're starting to put MVPs and new products in front of users is, for example, the fact that many times consumers haven't yet formed mental models for interacting with AI-enabled products. And a very good example are, for instance, chatbots that have a human-like interaction capabilities. We still live in a time where the job seeker experiences and the references they have are driven by previous experiences with chatbots, which had more limited capabilities. So what we see immediately, it's a need to educate and shape and drive the formation of those mental models. And I think this is something that it will be our job as an industry collectively to drive over the next few years.
Hey, if you're enjoying this Product People podcast, check out our weekly live streams on LinkedIn and YouTube. Back to the episode. Great. And you mentioned mental models being an existing challenge because people had subpar experience with chatbots in the past, and as they had these weird if-else decision trees, and sometimes we all had this experience where they kind of got trapped in a loop or gave you completely useless answers. What other challenges have you encountered when introducing AI in your products, either being on how people are using them or on how you're building?
Well, first of all, in building, I think the first lesson is that is sometimes relatively easy to MVP something, but scaling AI-enabled products and large language model-based products, in our case, it's a whole different topic. It really does require a dedicated investment. Cost is and can be an issue and to some extent a limiting factor. And then the second learning is often there is an initial enthusiasm, and in AI there has been an initial enthusiasm in our industry as well. There are low-hanging fruits in every industry that you can pick up. But what we are discovering very quickly is that those low-hanging fruit become part of the table stakes and of the expectations in an industry. So very soon we're back to the thinking board, and we have to answer the question, what's fundamentally something that can provide strategic advantage over the longer term? Now, altogether, it's frankly a very, very, very exciting time to be doing product development. But these are questions that will stay with us for, I'd say, the next couple of years.
I agree and have the same experience at Zalando when we were helping on a parental leave for a few ML-powered products. And we saw the same problem there. When we ramped up something, we had to be careful to not create internal outages on our components. So if you're ramping up an A/B test and you want to expose this to a few thousands people per second, it's a bit different than having one or two users. So even ramping up some A/B tests proved difficult. On the other part, on the cost, we had a successful test that ended up getting a lot of click-throughs as well as improving some core KPIs we are looking at. But it ended up costing 10,000 euros more per month to just the storage cost of generating a few images that people were looking at when being fashion inspiration. And that was just a very simple test that immediately increased costs to decay more per month. So it's incredible at how at a bigger scale, you have not only the infrastructure problem to take care of before you can even roll it out properly, but also just the sheer cost of it. And that was like a very small change and a very small example in the larger scheme of things. And very cool also what you mentioned with low-hanging fruit become immediately fungible as benefits, and then you're on this red queen race where you need to run faster and faster and faster, because just like running at your current pace, you end up outdated. So how do you leverage user feedback? As we're all aware, it's super hard to train models, and they can end up in one of these optimizing loops where you have to sometimes get them out of completely. You know, how YouTube sometimes sees that you've looked for an oatmeal recipes and everything it shows you from now on is just like food recipes, whereas you just like look for a particular thing. Or how it was criticized for getting into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories also because that got people to click on things, and the algorithm said, if people are clicking, then it's good, so let's give them more conspiracy theories. And we had the same problem with a client I worked with, that at some point it saw that people clicked on certain search, and then it kept giving them somewhat a slightly duplicate content because they thought the user wants to see more of that content and more of that content and more of that content. And then we started getting bug complaints because people felt that the suggestions weren't diversified enough. So over to you.
If we think about user feedback, it is actually not that new because most products today that have some matching components have some type of recommendation technology. And most recommendation technologies leverage some form of behavioral data. So this has been around for quite a few years now. And the techniques developed to prevent both bias in a way, but also to make sure that we don't have these other effects would be the same. Now, in terms of AI, it is true that fine-tuning large language models is often one way to generate additional value. And especially for existing players who have access to existing data, it is one way to really make a product that is better. Now, what comes with that is a need for even extreme care, I would say, because we are talking about products that can have an impact on the lives of tens of millions of people. And when we're talking about impact at this scale, I'd say probably AI ethics and the whole range of thinking around that is paramount.
Great. What are the most promising AI trends that PMs should prepare for?
Well, it depends, I would say, in what area, because there are probably slightly different ways to leverage AI, but I can speak about consumer-facing platforms. By and large, I think the biggest change that we're going to see is the ability to take advice and guidance to the next level and actually put it at the level of the experience and across the board. So in many marketplaces, we have been evolving from over the past 10, 15 years from transactional models to relational models, relying a lot more on organic traffic. And we're now seeing popping up the metaphor of a concierge. I think this is something that will be here to last. And part of the execution layer for that metaphor will involve, first of all, as I said, going much deeper into understanding the fundamental needs of the job seeker. So I think then the expectations for product managers will be that mastery of techniques associated with truly uncovering user insight will be more and more important. But then also the ability to leverage data and the need to leverage data will have to be taken to the next level. And I would expect organizations to become even more aware and to have to quantify even better the value of their data.
I agree. And also adding the commercial leadership on top of that, as you also said earlier, you need to solve these problems for your customer base while at the same time capturing value for the company. One anecdotal example, I was speaking with a PM at a water company, and they were just shaping up their digital department. And the PM said that they were working on dashboards. And I said, yes, that dashboards to do what? And there was this whole discussion about data transformation and that is siloed right now and so on. But and I kept pressing the person, yes, but what are you doing with this data? What's the use case? And at some point managed to get out of them that they wanted to understand which customers are falling behind on invoices to basically optimize the collection process which initially I thought it was like something more sophisticated, like they're monitoring for water quality, potential shortages. I was thinking of IoT sensors and all of that, but they wanted like something super basic to remind people of invoices. So you see also how far along some companies have to go on that. But at the same time, I would want to point out to the people listening to this that it's not just about collecting the data or doing discovery. You also still need to think of the business, because otherwise you may end up overbuilding or solve some things without putting a robust business model behind them. So, Florin, with that, one final question. Where do you see AI's impact on the digital product landscape in the next 5 years?
Well, as I said earlier, that today users in general haven't yet built mental models for experiences enabled by AI. My assumption and possibly hope is that will have happened in a few years. And I think we are essentially on the cusp of redefining the standard patterns of interaction with consumers. I believe natural language will inevitably play a much stronger role, and that will have for consequence a number of other changes. But beyond the experiences, I believe that we may actually see a change in the business models that are powered today. And one of the immediate examples are changes in business models driven by content. For quite a while, we've had many businesses built around a growth loop relying on content. You have more content and you want to make that content easily available or as easily as possible because it generates more traffic. Today, we might be coming to a point where the content is easily available. It can, but that only means that it will become part of the training set for large language models, and consumers will be able to benefit from that knowledge base without any visit to the original property. And that is actually a fundamental change in the business model. So what could that lead to? It will be interesting to see if directionally that doesn't mean that we'll have an increase in walled gardens and domains where content is available only in some restricted environment. Certainly, as I said, an exciting time.
Right, because people will end up bypassing Google search and just ask ChatGPT directly, and currently only the paid version searches via Bing. And you also mentioned the walled gardens. I also noticed for myself, sometimes I don't search on Google anymore. I would search on Reddit or Hacker News or something like that, because there's so much SEO spam out there that I don't want to filter through pages of results that are the landing pages of some SaaS tool that just generated some articles. So I think this is indeed a super interesting direction on how this will be shortcutted in the future, but also may completely change the way people access answers and information.
Well, and it's also $1 trillion question.
And that's a great way to end it. Thank you so much, Florin, for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this Product People podcast. If you found it useful, please subscribe and consider giving us a rating. For more info, visit getproductpeople.com and see you next time.